My name is Chloe. I am 30 years old. 3 months before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I opened my mailbox and found a heavy, cream-colored envelope with gold foil lettering. It was an invitation to a wedding at the Oak Ridge Country Club on September 14th. My venue, my exact date. But the names on the card were not mine and my fiance's. They were my younger sister Haley and her boyfriend Chase. I called the venue coordinator and learned my mother had phoned in pretending to be me. She canceled my reservation and transferred my $15,000 deposit to Haley's name. She told the venue I had a family emergency and graciously wanted my sister to take the slot. What my mother and sister did not know was that my fiancé Liam had quietly finalized the purchase of the Oak Ridge Country Club's parent company 2 weeks prior. Their attempt to hijack my dream wedding had just triggered a localized security block in the club's financial system. Before I tell you how I let them walk straight into a massive legal trap, let me know your age and where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to Sweet Karma Life if you have ever had a toxic sister steal your spotlight while your parents enabled her. You will want to hear exactly how I ruined her fake big day. Now let me take you back to the moment I held that invitation in my driveway. The paper was thick, the kind of expensive cardstock that costs $5 a sleeve. I stood next to my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, tracing the raised gold lettering with my thumb. September 14th, the date I had booked 18 months in advance, the date I had paid for using the savings from my first major corporate promotion. I am a contract manager for high-end corporate events. I spend 50 hours a week negotiating force majeure clauses, liability waivers, and non-refundable retainers. I read fine print for a living. So when I saw Haley and Chase's names printed over my wedding date, I did not drop to my knees. I did not scream. I went inside, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop. I logged into the Oak Ridge client portal. The screen flashed red. Account locked. Reservation transferred to secondary party per client request. My phone rang. It was the former event coordinator for the club. She sounded nervous, apologizing profusely, explaining that my mother Diane had called from my phone number, verified my billing address, and authorized the transfer. My mother had spoofed my caller ID. She committed wire fraud to give her golden child the September wedding aesthetics she demanded. Haley is 26. She is an aspiring lifestyle influencer whose entire online presence is funded by my parents' credit cards. When she got pregnant 2 months ago, Chase's wealthy family demanded a fast, flawless wedding to protect his tech startup image. They needed a luxury venue immediately. My mother decided I was the easiest resource to harvest. I hung up the phone and looked across the kitchen at Liam. He was sitting on a sofa, reviewing a stack of property deeds. Liam is 34. He is a commercial real estate investor who prefers spreadsheets to family drama. He does not yell, he calculates. I walked over and handed him the gold foil invitation. He read the cursive script, took off his reading glasses, and rubbed his temples.
Did your mother really think a premier country club just transfers a $15,000 deposit over a phone call?
He asked. She thinks she's untouchable, I said. Liam opened his laptop. 2 weeks ago, his investment firm bought Oak Ridge Holdings. He had not announced it publicly yet. Because of the ownership transition, the old venue manager had carelessly pushed my mother's fraudulent transfer through the system. But Liam's new security protocols had already flagged the mismatched financial data. He had the power to reverse the transfer with one keystroke. Should I void her booking right now? Liam asked, hovering his mouse over the screen. No, I said. I knew how my mother and Haley operated. If we canceled it now, Haley would just play the victim, cry to my aunts, and demand my parents empty their retirement accounts for another venue. I wanted her to sign the vendor contracts first, the exclusive, non-refundable caterers and florists that Oak Ridge required. I wanted her to assume the liability. Liam looked at me and closed his laptop. You want her to dig the hole. I want her to buy the shovel, I replied. I grabbed my car keys off the counter. I am going to my mother's house. I parked my car in the pristine driveway of my childhood home. The lawn was manicured. The hedges were trimmed into sharp squares. It was a house built on the appearance of success, funded entirely by credit card debt and second mortgages. I walked up the brick path and bypassed the front door. I went straight around back, pushed open the patio slider, and walked directly into the kitchen. My mother, Diane, was sitting at the massive granite island. Next to her sat my sister Haley. They were huddled over an iPad, scrolling through high-resolution images of cascading white hydrangeas and imported silk table runners. They had a physical binder open next to the tablet, filled with color palettes and catering menus stamped with the Oak Ridge Country Club logo. They were actively planning the wedding they had just stolen from me. I walked up to the island and dropped the heavy gold foil invitation directly onto the screen of the iPad. It landed with a loud smack against the glass. "You canceled my venue." My mother did not jump. She did not look guilty. She simply let out a long, exhausted sigh, as if my presence was a scheduled inconvenience she now had to manage. She took off her reading glasses, folded them neatly, and placed them next to her coffee mug. "Chloe, please do not make this a drama," she said. Her tone was the exact pitch she used when we were children, and I complained that Haley had broken one of my toys. It was a tone designed to make the victim feel like the aggressor. "Haley is pregnant," my mother continued, gesturing vaguely toward my sister, who was busy pretending to inspect a cuticle. "She and Chase need to get married immediately. We are trying to save face with his venture capital investors. You know September is peak wedding season." We called everywhere. There was nothing else available that fit the image they need to project. Let me explain the image they needed to project. Chase runs a tech startup that has not generated a single dollar in actual revenue. He leases a Porsche Macan that he hides in the garage when the repo men circle the neighborhood. He is currently trying to secure Series B funding from a group of angel investors who only back founders that exude traditional stability and wealth. A rushed courthouse wedding would signal financial distress. A lavish $100,000 event at the most exclusive country club in the state would signal power. My sister and her boyfriend were using my wedding date as a theatrical prop to secure a business loan. "You impersonated me on a recorded phone line to steal my $15,000 deposit," I said. My voice was dead calm. The kind of calm that comes when you realize the people you share DNA with view you solely as a resource. My mother waved her hand dismissively, brushing the invitation off the iPad. "I am your mother," she said. "It is family money. We pool our resources when a family member is in a crisis. Haley is in a crisis." I stared at her. Family money. It was a fascinating phrase. When I was 18, my mother told me there was no college fund for me because they needed to repair the roof. I worked 30 hours a week at a logistics warehouse to pay for my state university tuition. When Haley turned 18, they took out a home equity line of credit to send her to a private arts college in New York. She dropped out after 2 semesters because the dorm lighting was bad for her skin. Every cent of the $15,000 deposit sitting in the Oak Ridge ledger came from my own savings account. I earned it by working 60-hour weeks and managing million-dollar corporate retreats. My mother had never contributed a dime to my life since the day I graduated high school. "It is not family money," I said, keeping my posture straight. "It is my money." "You and Liam have been engaged for 2 years," my mother countered, ignoring my statement entirely. "You are already practically married. You can wait a little longer to do the official paperwork. We will pay you back the deposit when Chase secures his funding. Until then, you can just do a nice backyard ceremony at your place. Liam has that big lawn behind his house. We can set up some folding chairs. It will be intimate." She was offering me folding chairs on my own lawn while she booked imported silk runners with my money. Haley finally looked up from her nails. She offered me a pitying, tight-lipped smile. "Sorry, Chloe, but my followers are expecting a luxury aesthetic. A backyard barbecue just would not work for my brand. My sponsors want premium content." She said this with total sincerity. She genuinely believed her curated grid of iced lattes and gifted skincare products took precedence over my life. She was 26 years old and had never signed a lease, paid a utility bill, or held a job that required a W-2 tax form. Yet she sat in my mother's kitchen, bathed in the glow of an iPad, deciding my fate because my mother had taught her that the world would always bend to her preferences. Any other day, any other year, I might have cracked. I might have yelled until my throat hurt. I might have cried and begged my mother to explain why my sister's fake luxury aesthetic was worth destroying my actual happiness. But knowing what Liam and I knew, knowing the silent trap that was already closing around them, I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I looked at the binder sitting on the counter. I saw the vendor contracts peeking out from the front pocket. Oak Ridge required clients to use their approved list of luxury vendors. The caterer alone required a $20,000 minimum guarantee. The floral vendor required $10,000. To secure the date, Haley would have to sign those contracts personally, legally binding herself to the debt under the Oak Ridge umbrella. "Have you signed the vendor agreements yet?" I asked softly. Haley perked up, eager to talk about her aesthetic. "Yes," she said. "We locked in the gold tier catering package this morning. Chase signed the liability waivers so we could get the tasting scheduled. They're doing a custom raw bar for the cocktail hour." I felt a small, dark thrill settle in my chest. They had signed. They had put their names on a dotted line for tens of thousands of dollars in non-refundable services, anchored to a venue they did not legally possess. Because Liam owned the parent company, those contracts were about to become financial hand grenades. I did not yell. I did not cry. I reached out, picked up my heavy gold foil invitation from the counter, and slid it back into my purse. I looked at my mother. I looked at my sister. "I hope you enjoy the aesthetic," I said. I turned around, walked out the patio door, and got back into my car. I did not look in the rearview mirror as I drove away. I pulled out my phone and called Liam. He answered on the first ring. "They signed the vendor contracts," I told him. Liam let out a low whistle over the speakerphone. "Chase just guaranteed $45,000 in minimums on a frozen account. Do you want me to initiate the compliance audit now?" "Yes," I said, merging onto the highway. "Shut them down. Let them find out exactly what happens when you sign a contract you cannot afford." I pulled into the driveway of the home Liam and I shared. It was a restored mid-century modern house tucked into a quiet wooded lot. There were no manicured hedges shaped into perfect squares. There were no luxury cars leased at 30% interest parked out front. Liam drove a 4-year-old truck and wore plain gray sweaters. He owned the driveway, the house, the woods behind it, and the commercial shopping center 3 miles down the road. I walked inside and found him exactly where I expected. He was sitting at his massive walnut desk in the home office, bathed in the soft blue light of dual monitors. Liam is 34. He is a commercial real estate investor who specializes in distressed assets. He finds failing properties, buys them quietly, restructures their debt, and turns them into profitable machines. He prefers spreadsheets to social media. He does not understand the concept of a personal brand. He understands yield. I walked up behind his leather chair and set my purse on the floor. "I told you on the phone that they signed the vendor agreements," I said, leaning over his shoulder to look at the screen. "But I want to see the actual portal. I want to see exactly what they committed to." Liam nodded. He clicked out of a zoning map and opened the Oak Ridge Country Club administrative dashboard. The screen populated with rows of client data, event dates, and financial ledgers. Let me give you some context on why Oak Ridge is not just a banquet hall. It is a closed financial ecosystem. Because I manage high-end corporate event contracts for a living, I understand the anatomy of a luxury booking. When I originally secured our September 14th date, I read every single line of the Oak Ridge Master Agreement. The contract contained an ironclad, non-negotiable anti-transfer clause. You cannot simply hand your date over to a friend or a family member if you change your mind. High-demand venues do this to prevent people from scalping prime weekend dates. If a client cancels, the date goes back to the venue and the venue keeps the deposit. When my mother called the front desk posing as me, she caught the outgoing event manager on her final week of employment. That manager was already checked out. She did not ask for photo identification. She did not require a notarized signature. She just typed Haley's name into the primary contact field and hit save, overriding the security protocol. But 2 weeks prior to my mother making that phone call, Liam had finalized the purchase of Oak Ridge Holdings. The ink was barely dry on the acquisition. He had immediately ordered his IT team to install a new suite of financial compliance software across the club's entire network. Liam clicked a tab on his dashboard. A bright yellow warning banner flashed across the top of Haley's file. The new software flagged the banking mismatch within 24 hours, Liam said, pointing to a string of numbers on the screen. The name on the credit card used for the $15,000 deposit does not match the name on the new event contract, and because the original cardholder has not signed an in-person liability waiver, the system automatically placed a soft hold on the funds. He leaned back in his chair and took off his reading glasses. He looked up at me. Did your mother genuinely think a premier country club just transfers $15,000 in escrow over a quick phone call? She thinks rules are for other people, I said. She has spent her entire adult life running up credit cards and shifting the debt around. She assumed a luxury wedding venue operates like a department store return desk. Liam shook his head. He pulled up the vendor attachments that Haley and Chase had signed that morning. Oak Ridge had a very specific business model. You paid the venue for the space, but you were required to use their exclusive approved list of external vendors for everything else. You had to use their master caterer. You had to use their master florist. You had to use their specialized lighting and sound technicians. Once you signed with those vendors under the Oak Ridge umbrella, you were personally liable for the minimums. It did not matter if your wedding was canceled. It did not matter if you broke up. The vendors blocked out their calendars for your event, turning away other clients. Their contracts were ruthless. Liam opened the catering agreement. Chase had signed his name at the bottom in thick blue ink. They opted for the gold tier package, a custom raw bar with imported oysters, Wagyu beef sliders for the cocktail hour, a 5-course plated dinner. $22,000, Liam read aloud. Non-refundable. Payment due in full 30 days prior to the event. He clicked on the floral contract. Cascading white hydrangeas, imported orchids, and custom silk table runners. $12,000. Signed by Haley. He opened the lighting and sound contract. A 10-piece live band and custom uplighting for the ballroom. $11,000. Signed jointly by both of them. They just legally bound themselves to $45,000 in hard debt, Liam said, his voice dropping into a low, clinical register. And they anchored all those contracts to an event space they secured through wire fraud. He moved his mouse to the top right corner of the screen. There was a bright red button labeled Void Reservation. If he clicked it, Haley's date would be wiped from the calendar. The vendors would be notified immediately. The fraud would be exposed before the sun went down. Should I cancel her booking right now? Liam asked. His finger hovered over the mouse button. I can terminate the file. The vendors will come after them for a breach of contract fee, maybe 10%, and we can put this whole thing to bed. I stared at the red button. I thought about my mother, sitting in her kitchen, offering me folding chairs on my own lawn while she spent my hard-earned money on my sister's fake luxury aesthetic. I thought about Haley, telling me my face was ruining the vibe. For 30 years, I had watched my sister skate through life on a pavement paved by my sacrifices. If we canceled the booking today, she would suffer a minor inconvenience. A 10% penalty was just another bill my mother would bury under a second mortgage. Haley would cry, play the victim, and pivot to another venue. No, I said, do not click it. Liam looked up at me, his hand resting quietly on the mouse. I know how my sister operates, I explained. She is a parasite. If we cut her off right now, she survives. I want her to plan this wedding. I want her to send out the save the dates. I want her to tell all her little influencer friends about the raw bar and the orchids. Let her sign the final proofs. Liam studied my face. A slow, dark smile spread across his lips. You want her to dig the hole. I want her to buy the shovel, I replied. I reached over and touched his shoulder. Leave the soft hold on the account, I instructed. Let the system run its standard 30-day compliance audit. When the 30 days are up, the system will trigger a hard freeze. The venue will demand the primary account holder, which is me, come down and verify the funds in person. Until then, let them build their glass castle. Liam closed the vendor files. He left the event marked as pending. The trap was set. The timer started ticking down. It was a silent, invisible wire strung across the hallway of their fake lives, and all they had to do was keep walking forward. 2 weeks passed. I did not text my mother. She did not call me. The silence was not an apology. It was a strategy. She assumed I was sulking and would eventually fall back into line. She assumed I would swallow my anger and show up to play my assigned role. My role was the background character, the reliable, boring older sister who existed solely to highlight Haley's shine. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a thick white envelope arrived at my office. It was not a wedding invitation. It was a summons for the next phase of their performance. My mother was throwing Haley a lavish bridal shower at a downtown bistro, and she needed an audience. She needed her worker bee to show up, hold the presents, and validate the illusion. I looked at the invitation sitting on my desk. The trap was armed. The compliance audit was quietly running its course in the Oak Ridge servers. All I had to do was attend the shower, sip sparkling water, and watch my sister brag about a future that was already quietly burning to the ground. 2 weeks later, the performance continued in full view of our entire extended family. My mother rented the glass atrium of a trendy downtown bistro for Haley's bridal shower. I attended strictly for reconnaissance. I wore a simple navy sheath dress. I did not wear it to be modest or to blend in. I wore it because it felt like armor. I arrived 15 minutes late, intentionally bypassing the stage photo wall, covered in pastel balloon arches and eucalyptus branches. I found a small table near the emergency exit. I ordered a glass of sparkly water with lime and settled in to watch the illusion unfold. The room hummed with the sound of 50 women clinking crystal flutes and adjusting their designer bags. Haley sat at the head of a long reclaimed wood table, wearing a white silk slip dress that cost more than her monthly car payment. She was flanked by our aunts, who treated her like a celebrity rather than an unemployed 26-year-old. Aunt Patricia leaned forward across the table. She is a woman who spent the last decade funding her own son's failed business ventures, so she respects the grift. "So tell us about the venue," Patricia cooed while touching Haley's arm. "Diane said you managed to book Oak Ridge for a September Saturday. That wait list is 3 years long." Haley took a delicate sip of champagne. "It was just a miracle," Haley said, her voice dripping with practiced humility. The venue literally opened up at the last second. It is like the universe knew Chase and I were meant to be there. We drove up the driveway and we just felt this energy. Chase was leaning against the exposed brick wall nearby, holding a craft beer. He is 31 and trades cryptocurrency. He was talking loudly to Aunt Patricia about decentralized finance and his upcoming round of venture capital funding. "We only accept the best," Chase nodded smugly, raising his glass toward Patricia. "You have to put that energy out into the market, and the market provides." He set his phone face up on the high-top table next to my water glass to emphasize his point. A second later, the screen illuminated with a bright banner notification. It was an automated text message from an auto recovery agency. The preview text read, "Final notice of default on Portia McCann lease repossession order authorized." Chase saw my eyes drop to the screen. He quickly snatched the phone off the table and shoved it into his jacket pocket. His smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he took a nervous gulp of his beer. My mother stood up and tapped a silver spoon against her champagne flute. The room quieted down immediately. She raised her glass toward my sister. To Haley, my mother beamed. A girl who never settles. A girl who always knows how to manifest her dreams. I took a slow sip of my water. Manifesting. It was a fascinating verb for committing identity theft. I watched my aunts raise their glasses blind to the reality that they were toasting a federal crime. When the lunch plates were cleared, the gift opening commenced. This was the part of the afternoon where my assigned role was enforced. I was not treated as the older sister of the bride. I was the unpaid event staff. My mother snapped her fingers at me from across the room, pointing to the mountain of silver and gold boxes. "Chloe, grab a trash bag for the ribbons." My mother ordered loudly. Keep a list of who gave what, so Haley can do her thank you cards. I stood up. I took a black plastic bag from a waiter. For an hour, I stood behind Haley's chair, gathering torn wrapping paper and crumpled tissue. I watched her unbox expensive espresso machine she would never learn how to clean. I watched her unfold imported silk robes. I watched her collect heavy envelopes filled with cash. Every time she ripped open a box, she handed the garbage backward, without looking, expecting my hands to be there to catch it. At one point, Aunt Patricia pulled out her phone to record a video for Instagram. Haley immediately dropped her sweet facade and snapped her fingers at me without turning around. "Chloe, step out of the frame," she hissed, keeping her fake smile frozen for the camera. "You are holding a black garbage bag, and it is ruining my aesthetic. Move." I quietly stepped out of the shot and waited against the wall, holding her trash while she twirled the silk robe for her followers. This dynamic was the foundation of our family. When we were teenagers, Haley would leave her laundry on the bathroom floor, and my mother would tell me to wash it because I was already doing a load. When Haley wrecked my parents' car at 17, my mother asked me to drive her to school every morning because family helps family. Gathering her trash at a bridal shower funded by my stolen venue deposit felt like the perfect summary of our entire sisterhood. When the final box was opened, the crowd dispersed toward the dessert table. I tied off the trash bag and carried it toward the kitchen doors. Before I could push them open, a hand grabbed my elbow. I turned around. It was Haley. Her cheeks were flushed from the champagne, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. She pulled me into the narrow hallway near the restrooms, away from the aunts and the hired photographers. "Look, Chloe," Haley whispered, while checking over her shoulder to make sure Chase was not listening. "I know you were probably jealous today. I get it. It is hard watching your younger sister hit all the milestones first, but you really need to fix your face. You were sitting in the corner glaring at everyone, and you were bringing down the vibe." I looked at her. I did not blink. "I am drinking water, Haley." "Well, drink it happier," she snapped. "Plus, I need you to do something for me tomorrow morning. I need you to call the Oak Ridge coordinator." The demand hung in the narrow hallway. I waited for the punchline. "They are being annoying about the catering contract," Haley continued while crossing her arms defensively. "They keep asking for a secondary signature on the vendor minimums. Since your credit card is still technically on file for the deposit, the system requires you to authorize the overages." "It is just a formality. The coordinator said they just need you to click a link and hit approve." I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of the request settle into my bones. She was not just asking me to step aside and let her steal my wedding. She was asking me to act as the financial guarantor for her stolen wedding. Let me translate what she was actually requesting. The Oak Ridge catering contract she signed required a $20,000 minimum spend. If she and Chase defaulted on that bill, which they inevitably would given his fake tech startup and her lack of income, the venue would legally pursue the secondary signer, me. She wanted me to hand her a $20,000 blank check to feed Wagyu beef and fresh oysters to Aunt Patricia and her crypto boyfriend. She genuinely believed I would do it. She believed it because my mother had spent 3 decades training her that my boundaries were mere suggestions and my resources were communal property. She thought she could steal my venue and then use my credit score to furnish it. Haley tapped her foot impatiently against the tile. "So just call them tomorrow. Tell them you approve the catering file. It takes 5 seconds, Chloe. Do not be difficult." I leaned against the hallway wall. The compliance audit Liam set up was quietly ticking down in the background of their lives. In a few short weeks, the Oak Ridge financial system would lock her out entirely. I did not need to scream. I did not need to throw my glass. "Oak Ridge has very strict ownership and fraud policies, Haley," I said softly. My voice echoed slightly against the cold tile floor. "They audit their accounts regularly. If you sign vendor agreements on an account you do not legally own, you inherit the liability. I would be careful what you sign." Haley rolled her eyes. She let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "You always try to make things sound so serious, Chloe." "It is a party, not a corporate merger. Just approve the email when it comes through." She turned on her heel and walked back into the atrium, seamlessly pasting a bright, vacant smile onto her face as she approached the dessert table. I did not follow her. I pushed the door open and walked out into the alley behind the bistro. The air felt clean and sharp. I pulled out my phone and sent Liam a text message. She asked me to guarantee the catering bill, I typed. 3 seconds later, 3 dots appeared on my screen. Liam replied. The compliance audit finishes its cycle on Friday. The trap snaps shut in 4 days. I slid the phone into my pocket. The shower was over, but the real show was just about to begin. Let them drink their champagne and eat their cake. Soon the bill was going to arrive, and there would be no one left to pay it. 30 days before the stolen September 14th wedding date, the invisible trap finally snapped shut. It did not happen with a dramatic explosion or a loud alarm. It happened silently, in the dark. At exactly 2 a.m, the 30-day timer expired. The Oak Ridge servers automatically executed the hard freeze. Every single luxury contract my sister had eagerly signed, the Wagyu beef caterer, the imported orchid florist, the 10-piece live band, was instantly suspended. I woke up at 6 that morning to go for a run. I made a pot of coffee. I stood in my kitchen and watched the sun come up over the trees behind Liam's house. It was a perfectly quiet Tuesday. I felt rested. I felt prepared. At exactly 7, my cell phone vibrated against the granite counter. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times. I picked it up and hit accept. "Chloe, what did you do?" my mother hissed into the receiver. She did not say good morning. She did not ask if I was awake. Her voice vibrated with a raw, frantic energy. In the background, I could hear the muffled sounds of someone pacing heavily across hardwood floors. "Haley's florist just called her in tears," my mother continued, her breathing shallow and fast. "The club vendor portal rejected her credentials. The venue put a hard freeze on the entire event file. They are saying the deposit is under review." I poured my coffee into a ceramic mug. I watched the steam rise into the morning air. "That sounds like a management issue," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "You should probably call them and sort it out." "I did call them," my mother snapped, her voice cracked, revealing genuine panic. "They told me the primary account holder has to physically come down to the administrative office by noon and sign a legal release form in person to unlock the vendors." She paused, taking a ragged breath. "You are going to fix this today, Chloe." "Haley is hyperventilating on the sofa right now. She thinks she is losing her date. She thinks Chase's investors are going to find out." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I pictured my sister sitting on my mother's expensive imported sofa, crying over a luxury aesthetic she tried to build using stolen money. I pictured my mother pacing the floor, desperately trying to keep the illusion of their wealth intact. "I did not transfer the deposit," I said simply. "I have no reason to sign a release form." The silence on the other end of the line turned heavy and dangerous. When my mother spoke again, her voice dropped into a familiar, weaponized octave. It was the tone she used whenever she needed to force me back into my designated place. "If you ruin her wedding because you are bitter," my mother said, pronouncing every syllable with lethal precision, "I will cut you out of this family forever." The threat hung in the air. Let me explain the gravity of those words. For 30 years, the fear of being cut out was the invisible leash my mother used to control my behavior. When I was 12 and won a regional science fair, my mother skipped the award ceremony because Haley had a minor cold. When I cried about sitting alone in the auditorium, my mother told me I was being selfish and threatened to stop speaking to me for a week. I spent my entire adolescence trying to earn my place at their table. When it was time for the senior prom, my parents claimed things were too tight financially to buy me a dress. I bought a second-hand gown from a thrift store and altered it myself. 2 years later, they took out a high-interest personal loan to buy Haley a custom designer gown because she deserved to feel like a princess. I paid for my own college degrees by working overnight shifts. I built a lucrative career managing corporate contracts. I bought my own home. I did everything right, hoping one day my parents would look at me and see someone worth celebrating. Instead, My independence just made me a more valuable asset to exploit. My success meant they never had to worry about me, freeing up all their resources to fund Haley's delusions. Standing in my quiet kitchen, holding a warm mug, listening to my mother prioritize my sister's stolen luxury aesthetic over my basic dignity, a profound physical shift occurred inside my chest. The lifelong fear of abandonment simply evaporated. It was replaced by a startling, crystalline clarity. My mother was threatening to revoke her love if I did not help her cover up a federal crime. She was threatening to exile me from a family that only viewed me as a walking ATM. She genuinely believed that banishing me from their toxic dynamic was the ultimate punishment. She did not realize she was handing me the key to my own cell. Being cut out of this family was not a penalty. It was a prize. "Are you listening to me, Chloe?" My mother demanded through the phone. Her voice broke through my thoughts. "You will drive down to that country club today and you will authorize the transfer. You will tell them it was a clerical error. You owe your sister this much after acting so cold at her bridal shower. If you do not fix this by noon, you are no longer my daughter." I looked out the window at the dense green trees. The morning sun was bright and unyielding. The trap they had walked into was now fully locked. They were cornered by their own greed, and they were demanding I hand them the escape hatch. "I will see you at the club at noon," I said. I did not wait for her to reply. I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. I set the device face down on the counter. I finished my coffee in total silence. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt the deep, steady calm of someone who holds all the cards in a game the other players do not even realize has ended. I walked down the hall to the home office. Liam was already sitting at his desk reviewing a zoning map. He looked up when I walked into the room. "The vendors are locked out," I told him. "My mother just threatened to disown me if I do not come down to the administrative office and sign a fraud release waiver by noon." Liam slowly closed his laptop. He stood up and grabbed his suit jacket from the back of the door. He checked his watch. "Well then," Liam said, adjusting his cuffs, "we should probably head to the office early. It sounds like the general manager has a very important meeting to prepare for." I did not drive to the country club at noon. I drove to my office building in the downtown financial district. I swiped my badge at the security turnstile, took the elevator to the 14th floor, and I worked. I am a senior contract manager for a global logistics firm. My job requires me to analyze risk and enforce compliance. I spend my days identifying loopholes, enforcing penalties, and ensuring that when someone signs a binding agreement, they are held accountable. I spent the morning reviewing a supply chain merger. I drank black tea. I attended a quarterly projection meeting. I left my cell phone inside my desk drawer. I let the silence stretch out, knowing exactly the kind of panic my absence was creating across town. My mother expects obedience to operate on her schedule. She uses urgency as a tool to bypass logic. Whenever she needed money or a favor, it was always an emergency that required an immediate response. By refusing to show up at the Oak Ridge administrative office, I was denying her the oxygen she needed to keep her fire burning. I knew she was sitting in that country club lobby, checking her watch, realizing for the first time in 30 years that her designated worker bee was not flying back to the hive. At exactly 2 p.m, the internal phone on my desk buzzed. It was the ground floor receptionist. She sounded uncomfortable. She told me my mother and sister were downstairs in the main lobby. She lowered her voice and added that they were speaking loudly, pacing the floor and making the corporate clients in the waiting area nervous. I thanked her. I saved my spreadsheet, locked my computer screen, and walked toward the elevators. I took my time. I watched the digital numbers above the elevator doors slowly descend. The lobby of my building is a massive expanse of polished gray marble and floor-to-ceiling glass. It is a quiet, sterile environment designed to project corporate stability. When the elevator doors slid open, the contrast between my professional world and my family was glaring. My mother was standing near the security desk, clutching her leather handbag tightly against her ribs. Haley was pacing near a row of leather waiting chairs. Haley wore oversized designer sunglasses indoors. Her face was visibly splotchy. Her perfectly curated aesthetic was cracking under the weight of actual, real-world consequences. They spotted me walking across the marble floor. My mother marched forward, her heels clicking sharply against the stone. She stopped 3 feet away from me. "Where were you?" she demanded. Her voice echoed off the glass walls. Several people in business suits turned their heads to look. "We sat in that country club lobby for 2 hours waiting for you. We look like fools." I stopped and looked at her. I did not shrink under the stares of the passing executives. "I was working," I said softly, keeping my posture relaxed and my hands out of my pockets. Some of us do not manifest our paychecks. We actually have to earn them. Haley stepped forward, pushing her sunglasses up into her hair. Her eyes were red and swollen. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to break my toys and cry until I apologized for leaving them in her way. But she was not a little girl. She was an adult trying to secure a fraudulent $20,000 catering bill. "Chase had his lawyer draft this," Haley said, sniffing loudly. She reached into her oversized canvas tote bag and pulled out a folded piece of white paper. She held it out to me as if it were a royal decree. "It is a waiver. It says you legally gift me the $15,000 deposit and relinquish all rights to the September 14th date." I did not take the paper immediately. I looked at the printed sheet hovering in the air between us. Chase did not have a lawyer. Chase traded digital coins and leased a car he could not afford. His lawyer was most likely a friend from his fraternity days who took a pre-law class and downloaded a generic template from the internet. They were backed into a corner, terrified of losing the venue, and their only play was to try and intimidate me with fake legal jargon. "If you sign it right now," Haley continued, her tone shifting from demanding to a sickeningly sweet bargaining voice. "Mom says you can still be a bridesmaid." I talked to the tailor. "I will even let you wear the silk dresses, not the chiffon." The offer hung in the cold air-conditioned lobby. It was a ransom note wrapped in a fake olive branch. Let me translate the currency of my sister's bribe. In Haley's world, proximity to her spotlight was the ultimate reward. The silk dresses were reserved for her fellow lifestyle influencers, the girls who would look best in the background of her sponsored photos. The chiffon dresses were the cheaper, less flattering options assigned to cousins and background characters. She was offering to upgrade my status in her fake wedding party if I simply handed over the money and the venue I had earned with my own labor. 10 years ago, the offer of inclusion would have worked. 10 years ago, I would have signed the paper just to stand next to her in a silk dress, desperate for a photograph that proved I belonged to my own family. I would have sacrificed my own financial security just to avoid the silent treatment on Thanksgiving. But standing in that marble lobby, looking at my sister offer me a supporting role in a play funded by my own stolen money, I felt nothing but a profound hollow pity. They truly did not understand who they were dealing with anymore. They thought they were negotiating with the quiet, compliant older sister. They did not realize they were talking to the woman who designed the contracts they were currently violating. I reached out and took the folded paper from Haley's hand. I opened it. The document was printed on cheap copy paper. The margins were uneven. The text was a chaotic mix of legal buzzwords that made no actual sense in the context of venue liability. I scanned the first paragraph. I read the second line. "The person who drafted this document spelled the word relinquish wrong," I pointed out, tracing my finger under the glaring typo. "There is an extra letter near the end. It invalidates the entire sentence." Haley's face flushed a deep red. "You are being ridiculous," she snapped, her fake sweetness vanishing instantly. "Just sign the bottom of the page, Chloe. Do not ruin this for me over a spelling mistake. Chase needs this venue. His investors are asking for the formal invitations." My mother stepped closer, attempting to physically crowd my space. "We are not playing games today," she warned, her voice dropping an octave. "We brought a pen. Sign the paper, give your sister her date, and we can all move past this ugly behavior." I looked at the pen my mother was holding out. I looked at the poorly drafted waiver. I slowly placed my hands on the top edge of the paper. I pulled my hands in opposite directions. The thick sound of tearing paper echoed sharply in the quiet lobby. "What are you doing?" Haley shrieked, taking a step backward. I stacked the two torn halves together and tore them again. I folded the quarters into eighths, creating a thick wad of shredded, useless demands. I walked over to the stainless steel trash receptacle near the elevator bank. I dropped the pieces inside. They hit the bottom with a quiet, dismissive thud. I turned back to face my mother and my sister. They were staring at me with their mouths slightly open, paralyzed by the sudden, violent rejection of their script. "Oak Ridge is under new management," I said, keeping my voice low and steady so they had to strain to hear me over the ambient noise of the lobby. "The new ownership does not accept third-party waivers for wire fraud. They do not care about your aesthetic. They do not care about Chase's investors. They only care about liability. And right now, you are holding $45,000 in unauthorized vendor contracts." My mother's face went the color of wet ash. "Chloe," she whispered, the reality of the situation finally beginning to penetrate her anger. "The venue coordinator said the file goes to their legal department tomorrow morning if we do not provide a signature." "Then you have a very busy morning ahead of you," I replied. "You cannot fix this in my office lobby. You cannot fix this with a fake waiver. If you want to keep that wedding date, you are going to have to go back to the club and speak directly to the owner." I did not wait for them to argue. I turned my back to them, swiped my security badge at the turnstile, and walked through the glass barrier. I did not look over my shoulder as the elevator doors closed, sealing me safely back into a world where actions actually have consequences. The Oak Ridge Country Club sits on 400 acres of manicured hills and ancient oak trees. It is a fortress of old money, strict rules, and generational wealth. The clubhouse is a massive stone building with thick ivy crawling up the pillars and a slate roof that looks like it belongs on a European estate. Entering the grounds requires passing a guarded gate. You do not just show up at Oak Ridge. You are invited, or you are a member. Liam and I arrived at 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning. We bypassed the main guest entrance and parked in the underground garage reserved specifically for executive staff. We took the private service elevator up to the general manager's suite. The suite is located on the second floor. It overlooks the 18th hole and features a wall of soundproof glass that looks directly out over the administrative reception area. We sat in deep leather chairs drinking espresso and watching the clock tick toward 9. Sarah is the general manager of Oak Ridge. She is 45 years old. She wears tailored charcoal suits and possesses the kind of terrifying calm that comes from managing the demands of billionaires for 2 decades. Liam had briefed her on our family situation the night before. Sarah understands discretion. She understands corporate protocol. More importantly, she understands how to handle people who pretend to have money. She stood behind the polished reception desk right outside our glass wall, waiting for the morning show to begin. At exactly 9:15, the elevator doors in the reception area parted. My mother and Haley stepped out. They had clearly spent the morning trying to assemble an armor of luxury to intimidate the staff. Haley wore a pristine white blazer draped over her shoulders and oversized designer sunglasses that she did not remove indoors. My mother carried a leather handbag that cost more than her first car. They walked with the stiff, exaggerated posture of people pretending they are not entirely terrified. They approached Sarah at the front desk. We could not hear the initial words through the soundproof glass, but the body language told the entire story. My mother pointed a rigid finger at the desk. She leaned forward, trying to physically crowd Sarah's space. I watched my mother slam both her hands flat onto the polished wood surface. She was demanding obedience. This was her standard survival tactic whenever she was backed into a corner. She genuinely believed volume equaled authority. She shouted that they had a signed contract for September 14th. She demanded to know why their vendors were locked out. She yelled that this arbitrary freeze was entirely unacceptable and threatened to sue the club for emotional distress if the issue was not resolved immediately. Sarah did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not offer an apology. She simply nodded, offering a polite and highly practiced smile. She reached under her desk and pressed a silver button on her console. A soft click echoed through the reception area as the heavy mahogany double doors leading into our executive suite unlocked. Sarah extended her hand toward the entrance. She told my mother that the owner of the club had been briefed on their specific situation and was stepping in personally to handle the grievance. She invited them to walk right this way. My mother adjusted her posture, smoothing the front of her silk blouse. She gave Haley a victorious look. They believed they had won. They believed their loud public performance had intimidated the front desk staff into giving them VIP treatment. My mother pushed open the heavy double doors and marched into the room, ready for a fight with a faceless corporate entity. Haley followed close behind her, pulling her phone out of her pocket, as if she planned to record the interaction for her followers. They stepped onto the thick Persian rug. They stopped dead in their tracks. The heavy doors clicked shut behind them, sealing the room. The air in the office was thick and cold. I was sitting in a high-back leather guest chair, holding my ceramic espresso cup. My legs were crossed. Liam was standing behind the massive mahogany desk. He was not wearing a tie. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing his forearms. He looked entirely comfortable. He looked exactly like a man who owned the building. Because he did. Haley lowered her phone. Her eyes darted frantically between me and the heavy wooden desk. "What are you doing here?" Haley stammered. Her voice cracked, losing all its previous arrogant bravado. "Chloe, did you break into the office to sabotage my meeting?" She genuinely believed I had snuck past security to ruin her moment. Her brain simply could not process the alternative. She had spent her entire life believing I was a background character in her story. The idea that I held the keys to the kingdom was mathematically impossible in her mind. "Take a seat, Diane," Liam said. His voice was deep, cold, and incredibly authoritative. He did not say Mom. He did not offer a polite smile. He did not extend his hand for a greeting. He spoke to her the exact way a judge speaks to a defendant in a courtroom. It was a tone that stripped away all her maternal authority in a fraction of a second. My mother stood frozen on the plush carpet. All the color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale, sickly gray. She looked at Liam. She looked at the expensive artwork on the walls. She looked at the brass nameplate sitting on the corner of the desk. "Liam, why are you behind that desk?" my mother asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. The reality of the situation was starting to crack through her delusions, but she was actively fighting it. She refused to believe the quiet man she had dismissed for 2 years held her fate in his hands. When Liam and I first started dating, my mother called him a boring pencil pusher because he did not drive a sports car or brag about his investments. She had no idea how dangerous a quiet man with a spreadsheet could be. Liam rested his palms flat on the desk, leaning forward slightly. "Because I bought Oak Ridge Holdings 2 weeks before you impersonated my fiance on a recorded phone line," Liam said. He delivered the words with zero emotion. It was a simple statement of fact that carried the weight of an anvil dropping from a 10-story window. He did not raise his voice. He did not gloat. He reached out and tapped a single key on his open laptop. The executive office was outfitted with a premium surround sound system used for virtual board meetings. The audio file of my mother's phone call flooded the space. The sound was crisp, clear, and undeniable. "Yes, this is Chloe." My mother's recorded voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "I need to transfer my deposit to my sister Haley immediately. We have a family emergency, and she needs the slot." The recording ended with a sharp digital click. The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched my mother swallow hard, trying to find saliva in a mouth that had suddenly gone bone dry. Haley stared at the laptop as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. The trap they had spent 30 days building around themselves was now fully illuminated under the harsh fluorescent lights of reality. The illusion was over. The audio file was not just a recording. It was a confession to wire fraud and identity theft captured on a corporate server. My mother slowly lowered herself into one of the guest chairs. Her hands were shaking. Haley remained standing, paralyzed by the sudden shift in gravity. She opened her mouth to speak, but she had no script for a room where her tears held no currency and her aesthetic offered no protection. The meeting was just beginning, and the crushing financial bill for their fake wedding was finally sitting on the table, waiting to be paid. The recording ended with a sharp digital click. The sound of my mother committing federal wire fraud faded into the heavy mahogany walls. The silence that filled the executive suite was not empty. It possessed a crushing physical weight. I listened to the quiet hum of the central air conditioning. I watched my mother swallow hard. Her throat moved, but there was no moisture left in her mouth. She clutched her expensive leather handbag so tightly, her knuckles turned the color of old bone. Liam did not smile. He did not lean back in his chair to savor the victory. He operated with the cold precision of a surgeon amputating an infected limb. He reached across his desk and picked up a thick manila folder. The Oak Ridge Country Club crest was stamped on the front in dark green ink. He placed the folder flat on the desk and pushed it slowly toward my mother. The sound of heavy paper sliding over polished wood echoed like a gavel striking a block. "Here is the reality of your current situation," Liam said. His voice was even and measured. "The deposit transfer you initiated was fraudulent. I have already instructed the accounting department to reverse the ledger. Chloe's original master agreement is fully reinstated." He tapped his index finger against the top of the manila folder. "Your secondary booking is void. It no longer exists in the Oak Ridge database. You do not have a venue." Haley shot up from her chair. The pristine white blazer she had draped over her shoulders slid off and crumpled onto the floor. She did not bother to pick it up. Her carefully curated aesthetic shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She pointed a trembling finger at Liam. "You cannot do that!" Haley shrieked. Her voice hit a shrill, frantic pitch that vibrated against the soundproof glass. "I signed contracts. I signed agreements with the master caterer. I signed with the floral designer. They already ordered the imported centerpieces from Holland. You cannot just delete my wedding!" She was hyperventilating now. The reality of the trap was finally tightening around her throat. Let me give you some context on why Haley was panicking over the vendors rather than the loss of the room. Chase leased his cars and bought designer watches on credit to project the image of a successful startup founder. He was currently courting angel investors who monitored his public spending. If those investors saw him default on a massive luxury event, his fragile house of cards would collapse. He would lose his funding. Haley would lose her meal ticket. She needed this fake wedding to secure her real future. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the leather armrest of my chair. I looked directly into my sister's panicked eyes. "Exactly, Haley," I said. My voice was quiet, requiring her to stop screaming and actually listen. "You signed binding contracts with exclusive luxury vendors based on an event space you did not legally possess." She stared at me. Her breathing was ragged. "When you signed those vendor agreements," I continued, walking her through the trap she had blindly sprinted into, "you agreed to the minimum financial guarantees. What you failed to read was the independent guarantor clause. The contract explicitly states that the signers are unconditionally liable for the minimums, regardless of whether the event space reservation is valid, canceled, or legally voided. The vendors do not care how you got the date. They only care whose signature is on a dotted line." Liam leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. "Chase could try to sue your mother to void the debt," Liam said coldly. "But civil litigation takes years and creates a very public, easily searchable paper trail. I imagine his venture capital investors would find a fraud lawsuit involving their star founder highly concerning. He will have to eat the cost to protect his image." Liam opened the manila folder. He pulled out the signed documents. He read the numbers aloud, letting each figure hang in the cold air. The raw bar and the 5-course plated dinner. The custom silk draping and the 10-piece brass band. The imported orchids. "You and Chase are personally liable for $45,000 in vendor minimums," Liam stated. He closed the folder. "And since you committed fraud to secure the initial date, Oak Ridge Holdings will not be offering any leniency. We will not negotiate a payment plan on your behalf. The vendors will send the penalty invoices directly to your home address by the end of the week. If you fail to pay them within 14 days, they will initiate collection proceedings." My mother let out a sharp theatrical gasp. She pressed both hands against her chest, performing a pantomime of a heart attack. This was her signature maneuver. Whenever she was caught, whenever the consequences of her actions finally arrived at her doorstep, she immediately transformed herself into a fragile victim. Throughout my childhood, whenever she overdrew the checking account to buy herself new clothes, she would cry and tell my father the bank made a mistake. She expected the world to grant her endless grace while she offered none in return. "Liam, please," my mother begged, her voice cracked, trembling with manufactured tears. "We are family. You cannot ruin us over a simple misunderstanding." It was just a lapse in judgment. Haley was under so much pressure with the pregnancy. She reached across the desk, trying to place her hand over Liam's. He pulled his arm back before she could make contact. He looked at her with a level of clinical disgust that made my mother physically recoil. "I protect my family, Diane," Liam said. The words hit like stones. "You just showed me you are not part of it." He opened his top desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of heavy bond paper. He slid it across the mahogany surface until it stopped inches from my mother's hand. "This is a formal trespass notice," Liam said. "It has been legally registered with the local precinct and the security detail at the front gate. The guards have your license plate numbers and your photographs. If either of you sets foot on Oak Ridge property again, including the golf course, the dining room, or the parking perimeter, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing." My mother stared at the trespass notice. The printed black letter stripped away her final delusion. She could not yell her way out of this. She could not manipulate the narrative. She was officially banished from the luxury world she worshipped, and she was taking $45,000 of debt back to the suburbs with her. The meeting was over, but the consequences were just beginning. They were sitting in a locked office facing financial ruin. The private humiliation was complete, but the public reckoning was waiting just outside those gates. Haley had sent out invitations to 150 people, promising them a luxury aesthetic. She was going to have to explain why her glass castle suddenly vanished into thin air. Liam pressed the intercom button on his desk. Less than a minute later, 2 security guards in tailored dark suits stepped into the executive suite. They did not touch my mother or my sister. They simply stood by the open mahogany doors and waited. The implication was clear: walk out on your own or be physically carried out. Haley picked her white blazer off the floor. Her chest heaved with loud theatrical sobs. She desperately wanted an audience for her pain, but the only people in the room were a man who despised her and a sister who finally saw through her. My mother walked out first. Her spine was rigid. She stared straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact with the receptionist as we followed them out of the suite. The walk through the main lobby was brutal. Oak Ridge is a hub for local executives and politicians. At 10 in the morning, the lounge was filled with members drinking coffee and reading the Financial Times. They lowered their papers as my mother and sister were escorted toward the revolving glass doors. It was a silent, devastating exit. There was no screaming. There was just the undeniable reality of an eviction playing out under the crystal chandeliers. But Haley is a creature of the internet. In her world, reality is flexible. If you lose a fight in person, you sprint online to rewrite the narrative before the other side can speak. By noon, she had retreated to my mother's house, opened her laptop, and drafted a mass email to her 150 wedding guests. A cousin forwarded the email to me later that afternoon. It was a masterpiece of modern victimhood. Haley claimed the Oak Ridge management team was engaging in targeted discrimination against young entrepreneurs. She wrote that due to an unforeseen corporate restructuring, the venue had attempted to extort them for additional funds, forcing them to take the moral high ground and cancel their reservation. She promised a new, even more exclusive venue would be announced shortly. She genuinely thought she could spin the narrative. She relied on the long-standing family dynamic where I stayed quiet to keep the peace. She assumed I would let her play the martyr while I quietly reclaimed my date in the shadows. She was wrong. I was done keeping the peace. At 2 in the afternoon, I opened my social media accounts. I selected 3 high-resolution images from my official engagement photo shoot. The pictures were taken on the 18th hole at Oak Ridge. The grass was a vibrant emerald green. In the primary photo, Liam was holding my hand, laughing with the iconic stone clubhouse towering in the background. We looked grounded, secure, and untouchable. I typed a very simple caption: "Cannot wait to marry the man of my dreams at our beautiful venue on September 14th. So grateful to Liam and his team at Oak Ridge for securing our date." I hit post. I did not tag my sister. I did not mention the theft. I just dropped a quiet, immovable fact into the digital ecosystem and waited for the collision. It took exactly 12 minutes for the family network to fracture. My phone screen lit up. The notifications poured in like rain hitting a tin roof. The extended family group chat, a massive thread containing my parents, 4 aunts, and a dozen cousins, erupted into chaos. These were the same people who had received Haley's cancellation email just 2 hours prior. They were holding 2 conflicting pieces of reality. Haley said the venue canceled on her. I was publicly claiming the exact same venue on the exact same day. My mother tried to call my cell phone 20 separate times. I let every single call go to voicemail. I sat at my kitchen counter, drinking a glass of iced tea, watching the text messages scroll past. Cousin Emily asked if there was a glitch in the venue booking system. Aunt Patricia, the woman who had toasted Haley's manifesting skills at the bridal shower, sent a long string of question marks. Finally, Aunt Susan took the lead. Susan is the matriarch of the gossip mill. She sent a direct message to the main group tagging me. "Chloe, what is going on?" Susan wrote. "Diane is in tears. She says you and Liam used a corporate loophole to steal Haley's venue out from under her. Please tell us this is a misunderstanding." My mother had already started working the phones, trying to paint me as the villainous older sister who used her wealthy fiancé to crush a pregnant woman's dream. It was a desperate play, but it was the only card she had left. For 30 years, I would have responded with a long emotional paragraph. I would have defended myself. I would have laid out the timeline, begging them to believe me. But explaining is a defensive posture. It implies the other side has a valid argument worth debating. I did not argue. I opened my file manager. I selected the exported audio clip of my mother's phone call. I dropped the file directly into the family group chat. Then I attached a second file. It was a clean, high-resolution PDF screenshot of the police report Liam had filed that morning. In order to legally reverse the vendor contracts and protect Oak Ridge from liability, he had to document the identity theft with the local precinct. The report clearly listed Diane's name as the primary suspect for wire fraud, detailing the spoofed phone call and the stolen $15,000 deposit. I hit send. I did not add a caption. The files spoke for themselves. The red receipts at the bottom of the screen began to populate. First Aunt Susan, then Cousin Emily, then Aunt Patricia. One by one, every member of the extended family opened the audio file. They sat in their living rooms and listened to my mother impersonate me on a recorded line. They read the police report detailing the financial theft. The group chat went silent. There were no follow-up questions. There were no demands for an explanation. 2 pieces of undeniable evidence wiped out 30 years of my mother's carefully constructed narrative. For the first time in her life, she could not cry her way out of the consequences. She was exposed, in front of the exact audience she cared about most. The real-world fallout struck with devastating speed. By Friday evening, Aunt Susan and Aunt Patricia had blocked my mother's phone number. They were deeply embarrassed that they had participated in a bridal shower, realizing they had been used as props in a massive lie. The cousins quietly exited the group chat, one by one, leaving my mother standing alone in an empty digital room. But the social isolation was nothing compared to the financial detonation happening in Chase's camp. The Oak Ridge vendor invoices arrived in the mail on Thursday. $45,000 in cancellation fees, legally binding and due upon receipt. Haley and Chase did not have $45,000. Chase took the invoices to his parents, hoping they would bail him out to protect his venture capital image. Chase's father is a retired logistics executive. He spent his career reading contracts. When he reviewed the vendor agreements and discovered they were anchored to a fraudulent venue booking, he refused to write a check. He told his son he was a massive liability. The rejection triggered a foundation-shattering fight between Haley and Chase. Chase blamed Haley's mother for initiating the fraud. Haley blamed Chase for signing the contracts without reading the fine print. Their relationship, built entirely on a shared delusion of grandeur, began to crumble under the weight of actual adult responsibility. They had 30 days to figure out how to pay the debt before the vendors took them to court. And their fake luxury wedding was now a pile of ashes sitting in the middle of their leased apartment. As I watched the dust settle over their ruined plans, I realized the final chapter was fast approaching. September 14th was still on the calendar, and I had a real wedding to plan. September 14th arrived with a crisp breeze and a cloudless sky. The temperature held steady at exactly 72 degrees. I stood inside the bridal suite of the Oak Ridge Country Club looking out the second-story window. Below me, the manicured lawn stretched out like a green ocean meeting the edge of a quiet lake. White wooden chairs were lined up in perfect symmetrical rows. A string quartet was setting up their instruments near the water. I wore a custom silk gown. It was heavy, but it felt like armor. For the first time in 30 years, I was not bracing myself for a crisis. I was not waiting for an assigned task. I was simply the bride. I walked down the grand staircase and stepped out onto the grass. The guest list was smaller than originally planned, but it was honest. Liam's family filled the right side of the aisle. They were quiet, grounded people who welcomed me without demanding a performance. On the left side sat the few relatives from my bloodline who had chosen reality over the family delusion. Aunt Susan sat in the second row, wearing a tasteful floral dress. Cousin Emily sat next to her. When I walked past them, Susan reached out and gently squeezed my hand. She did not mention my mother. She did not mention Haley. That shared silence was the most profound apology she could have ever offered. My parents were not there. My sister was not there. The 2 front row seats on my side of the aisle were removed entirely, leaving no empty spaces. Down at the main gate a mile away, the security guard stood inside their heated booth with a printed binder. The binder contained the formal trespass notices and high-resolution photographs of my mother and sister. But they did not even try to show up. Bullies rarely breach a fortress when they know the gates are guarded by someone stronger than them. I met Liam at the altar. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit. He did not look like a man who spent his life analyzing risk. He looked like a man who had found his ultimate investment. We exchanged rings. We signed the marriage certificate in the study. We walked into the grand ballroom as husband and wife. The reception was a masterpiece of reclaimed joy. Because Liam owned the venue, we decided to keep the exact catering package my sister had fraudulently ordered. It seemed like a fitting tribute. Our guests dined on the Wagyu beef sliders. They ate the imported oysters from the custom raw bar. We danced under the specialized ambient lighting that Haley had so desperately wanted for her aesthetic. We enjoyed every single luxury that my toxic family was currently being sued for. Let me walk you through the precise mechanics of their downfall. While Liam and I were drinking champagne on a dance floor, my sister and her boyfriend were sitting in a leased apartment, staring at a stack of legal summons. 3 weeks after my wedding, Haley and Chase finally got married. They did not have a luxury venue. They did not have exclusive vendors. Because Chase's credit was frozen by the pending debt collections, they could not secure a commercial booking anywhere in the county. They were forced to apply for a $50 municipal event permit. They held their ceremony under a rusted metal pavilion at a public park near the highway. It was the second week of October. A cold front moved in overnight. It rained for 12 hours straight. There were no imported silk runners. There were no cascading white hydrangeas. Instead, there were cheap plastic folding chairs sinking into the wet mud. The park did not allow alcohol, so there was no champagne tower. Chase's venture capital investors did not attend. They had pulled out of his startup entirely upon discovering his pending civil suits for fraud. Chase wore an off-the-rack suit that did not fit because he had to sell his leased Porsche to cover the retainer for a defense attorney. Haley wore a discount dress. Her curated influencer brand collapsed overnight. You cannot project an image of effortless wealth when court documents detailing your financial theft are public record. She stopped posting online. She stopped manifesting. She started working a shift at a local retail boutique just to help cover their legal fees. The vendors showed no mercy. The catering company and the floral designer filed civil claims in county court for breach of contract. They won default judgments because Chase and Haley had no legal defense for signing agreements on a stolen property. The court ordered wage garnishments. My mother could not handle the social humiliation of seeing her golden child dragged through the local court system. She felt compelled to maintain the illusion that her family was financially invincible. So my mother drove to a local bank branch, sat across from a loan officer, and took out a second mortgage on her house. She leveraged the only asset she had left to pay off $45,000 in debt for a wedding that never happened. She is now paying a 7% interest rate on Wagyu beef that my guests ate and orchids that died in a warehouse. She signed away her retirement to protect a daughter who still blames her for the entire disaster. Haley barely speaks to my mother now. Without the steady flow of unearned cash, their relationship simply disintegrated. I heard all of this through Aunt Susan, who calls me every Sunday. I listen to the updates while sitting on the back patio of the house Liam and I share, drinking coffee and watching the leaves fall. I do not feel a single ounce of guilt. For 3 decades, I was expected to shrink so my sister could shine. I was taught that love required endless financial and emotional subsidies. I was trained to believe that setting a boundary was an act of betrayal. But I learned something very important standing in that executive office holding the deed to the property. When you stop accepting the script your toxic family writes for you, the entire play stops. They only have power over you if you agree to stand on their stage. The moment you walk out the door, their threats become background noise. You get to write your own ending, and my ending is quiet, safe, and legally binding. It has been exactly 14 months since Liam and I stood on the manicured lawn of the Oak Ridge Country Club and traded vows. The seasons changed. The winter frost killed the remaining ivy on the clubhouse, the spring brought new blooms, and the summer heat baked the fairways. In my old life, a year was simply a cycle of managing my mother's manufactured crises and quietly subsidizing my sister's expensive delusions. In my new life, a year is measured in quiet mornings, uninterrupted work, and the steady comfort of a home I built with a man who values me. I never unblocked my mother's phone number. I never checked on Haley's retail shifts or her crumbling marriage to Chase. Aunt Susan still calls me on Sunday mornings, sharing brief updates while I drink tea on my back patio. I listen, but I do not absorb the anxiety. The circus continues, but I am no longer the ringmaster. Looking back at the ashes of that fake September wedding, I realize that surviving a toxic family dynamic requires an active education. You cannot simply survive, you must study the mechanics of the abuse. Here are the 5 hard lessons I learned when I finally stopped shrinking. Number 1, boundaries require enforcement, not just declaration. A locked door means nothing if you leave the key under the mat for the person who keeps breaking in. My mother only respected the word no when it was backed by a legal trespass notice and a non-negotiable financial penalty. Number 2, family money is a weaponized myth. When an entitled relative demands your hard-earned resources, they call it a communal pool. When you need help, it suddenly becomes a lesson in individual responsibility. Keep your savings in an account that only requires your signature. Number 3, silence starves manipulation. The moment I stopped explaining myself, my mother lost her leverage. Explaining implies a negotiation. Walking away from a fight leaves a manipulator arguing with an empty room. Number 4, an aesthetic cannot pay a vendor minimum. Haley spent her entire life prioritizing the image of wealth over the reality of actual labor. She traded her financial future for the promise of an online aesthetic that never materialized. The real world always collects its debts, and it does not accept social media followers as currency. Number 5, blood is biology, but family is a choice. Standing at the altar, with Liam's steady relatives on one side and the few aunts who recognized the truth on the other, I realized my side of the aisle was not empty. It was simply filtered. You do not need a crowded table. You just need an honest one. I folded my custom silk wedding dress into a preservation box last week. I slid it onto the top shelf of the guest room closet. I do not need to look at it to remember what it represents. It is the physical proof of the day I stopped accepting the script my toxic family wrote for me. It is the day I handed my sister the shovel and let her dig. If you made it this far, thank you for sharing your time with me. Have you ever had to enforce an immovable boundary with a parent who enabled a golden child? Did you ever watch an entitled relative face the real world without a safety net to catch them? Share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one. Remember to protect your peace, build your own table, and hit subscribe to Sweet Karma Life for more stories just like this. I will see you in the next one.